You are listening to the No Gimmicks, Just Sweat podcast with your host, Eric Logan. No Gimmicks, Just Sweat is dedicated to hearing the journeys and unique stories behind an athlete's training and what drives them. Get inspired to own your life and make the impossible possible. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Also, please take a few seconds to rate the show and drop me a review. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello and welcome to this episode of No Gimmicks, Just Sweat. And today we are welcoming back Sophie Lambert. She was a guest on season 1, episode 9. Sophie, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Eric. Thanks so much for having me back.
Oh, thank you for coming back. And one of the things that I brought you back on is that I wanted to hear about your experience with the Boston Marathon. Because that seems like that was a very exciting moment. Not just for you, but an exciting moment for any runner that can get into Boston.
Yes, it really was epic. It was so amazing to be back at a big city marathon.
Yes. And the thing about Boston is more than just signing up and running your local marathon. So when did you decide that you wanted to run Boston?
So for me, Eric, this goes back to kind of the first stint I had with marathons. And I think in our episode, we talked about how I ran 3 marathons and then took about a 10-year break from training and running marathons. So it was back in 2006 in my very first marathon. I was running with a woman for the, maybe about 10 miles of the race. And we were chatting a lot. And she told me about how a few weeks after our marathon, she was going to go and crash the marathon with her dad, who was running the Boston Marathon. And of course, later in the race, when I was kind of dying, I couldn't believe that in a few weeks she was going to go run another marathon. And she ended up taking off and finishing quite a bit ahead of me. But she kind of sparked the idea of one day running the Boston Marathon. But back then, this was in 2006. Mm-hmm. So I qualified in that first marathon. That was a 3:25 kind of initial marathon for me. And I have to say, I didn't quite understand the process of how you signed up for it. And I'd heard how hilly it was. And I kind of wanted to find a flatter, faster marathon. And so ended up doing Chicago. But I do remember back then one time going to sign up for it. You could sign up for it over weeks, not a 4-day period. And you didn't have to have these huge buffer times. I think it was just very different back then before GPS watches and all that. So I ended up not doing it back then. Then starting up doing marathons again in December of 2018, definitely at that point set it as a goal. And I qualified when I ran the Chicago Marathon in October of 2019. But of course, that did not enable me to run Boston until, this October. So it would have been April of 2021 if COVID hadn't happened. And so then, of course, that race was, with everything kind of being messed up in the virtual Boston 2020, then I got to run it this October and actually had run a faster qualifying time than my Chicago time at a very small marathon in Virginia Beach in March of 2021. I'm getting all my years mixed up. So yes, March of 2021, I got a faster qualifying time and felt like I had a good enough buffer because I'm in my early 40s. I felt confident I would make it. And of course, had so many moments over the weekend of just appreciating being there because I know so many people had qualifying times but couldn't go because it was a smaller group of runners who ran a few weeks ago.
Okay. What was your training up to it? As far as you qualified earlier, but then 2020 happened. And so it had to get kind of pushed back. And then it got pushed back from the original, time that the Boston usually happens too much later into the fall. So how was that getting preparing for that?
I mean, I think like for so many runners, that extra time enabled me to grow and improve as a runner. I started working with a coach in July of 2020. So during that, pandemic shutdown time, I was like, why not invest in me? And working with a coach has really helped me improve tremendously. I think especially my endurance. I think the speed part is a little more of like a natural for me. And so for me, it's really working on those kind of longer efforts. So the training for my March marathon went really well. I had about an 11-minute PR at that race. And then after that, was signed up for Berlin and Boston this fall, which ultimately ended up being too much for me to pull off both. And I would say that since March, I took a few weeks off and picked some shorter races to train for. I would say I definitely had some obstacles. So I don't know, it might be helpful for your listeners to kind of hear, like, not every marathon build up is easy. I think a lot of us faced obstacles, and I would say from the summer until Boston, I faced a few. And I think a lot of us have bumps along the way, right? Like one challenging workout or getting sick once.
Yes.
I ended up having, I would say several challenges. So I had in July, I ran a 5K and really had this kind of breakout time, and really truly raced it. We have a local 5K that a lot of us, it's like kind of like our local, really kind of one of the only races that happens in my small town in Virginia. So I would say that race increased my VDOT score, maybe a little too much in retrospect, but it meant that I was then training at faster paces, which possibly like were too aggressive, although I was for a few weeks was hitting them. So I kind of look back now and I'm like, I think my peak fitness for the Boston buildup was in mid-July.
Oh, okay.
So unfortunately, in late July, I had not had a mammogram during the pandemic year and kept thinking, oh, I need to schedule that appointment. I need to schedule that appointment. And the UVA Breast Care Center called me and they're like, you need to schedule your appointment. And so I made an appointment right then and felt a little guilty that they had to call me to schedule my appointment. And after my mammogram, got a call saying, we found something questionable. You need to come back in.
Oh,
So
wow.
I ended up needing to have a biopsy for some small little granules they were seeing. So I think we have a PSA right here.
Yes.
I think especially if you're in your 40s, like make sure you have a mammogram if you can every year. And I feel very lucky. My health insurance is great and covered it. But I had to have, this procedure, right, where some samples were taken out of one of my breasts. So fortunately, it was not cancer. I have very dense tissue, and I think there was just, was some complication there. But it did result probably in about a week and a half of no running. But I think it was also just like emotionally draining. But then got back into running, had some challenging workouts, just, hot summer, was camping at the beach with my kids. I would never recommend trying to do a workout after sleeping in a tent. So there were just like little things like that. And then I'd say training kind of got going again. And then unfortunately, I got sick in September. I probably was wiped out for about 2 weeks. And I think I definitely learned from that experience. The moment you feel a sickness coming on, stop running. And I felt it coming on and I was like, oh, maybe it's nothing. Tried my workout. And then the workout didn't feel good. And instead of resting the next day, I tried my workout again. And I look back on that and I'm like, oh, that was really foolish. So I unfortunately, I think trying the workout again and then kind of running easy instead of just taking full rest, I think I really pushed myself. I was convinced I had COVID, even though I was vaccinated, and I didn't. I must have just had some sort of respiratory infection, but it wiped me out for 2 weeks,
Wow.
probably around the time of where my peak training would have been. So I think I knew that those obstacles had definitely impacted my fitness, but I was struggling maybe with like truly accepting that. I had one good workout 3 weeks from the race. So that was very promising. It was 12 miles at maybe just under 7 minute pace. But of course, that increased VDOT score had my goal marathon time like way faster than I felt was possible around now. But I was wondering if maybe I could like inch out a few seconds of a PR at Boston. And when we get to the race, you'll find out that was not the case.
All right. So before we get into the race day experience, let's talk about that night before. You know, it's the night before the race. What's going through your mind? How are you feeling? How are you preparing for the race day?
So just the whole trip was such an amazing adventure and chance to be around friends and like female friends. I think, you know, not that this was a huge obstacle, but just, you know, being the parent in my household. My husband has a very demanding job with kind of renovation and construction. So a lot of the childcare falls on me, and my kids going back to school, a lot of it fell on me. So I think just a chance to be away and with friends, which happens outside and a little bit in daily life, but to have a whole weekend like that was just such a blessing. Like it was such a treat. And so Monica, who I know you're interviewing as well, and we're good friends in our small town in Virginia. We were roommates and travel buddies, and also got to share the weekend with several other friends of ours. So it was just amazing. And the night before, Monica and I put on our nails. We watched the Chicago Marathon, which was great for inspiration. We talked about our goals and fears for the next day, and we were both just kind of giddy with excitement. I was eating lots of bagels. I had brought a toaster with me. And actually, one obstacle that I didn't mention, because I guess I'm losing track of all the obstacles I faced, is I'm still facing some GI challenges during my training. So I was being diligent about eating bagels. And I was trying to eat some gluten-free bagels, wondering if gluten is my issue, but that became more challenging as the weekend went on. But I think I probably had a bagel before I went to bed.
Oh, okay. All right. So it's race day. So let's start. What is your experience on race day? Getting up that morning, getting to the starting line, and from there.
So I think the key feeling that morning was just utter excitement. Like, oh my gosh, the energy in this city already feels amazing. What is it possibly going to feel like at the start with all these other runners? What is it going to feel like to see the fans? Because it had been, so long since I had been at a big race with lots of fans. It was Chicago 2019, and I love that energy at a big city race. So I was just really excited. I got all my stuff on, headed out the door with Monica and our friend Alexis, and we started walking. And in the back of my head, I was like, I think my race plan is too aggressive. I should run with these ladies. They have a more conservative plan. Wouldn't it be fun to run with them? And I realized I'd forgotten my bagel. And I couldn't believe it. And of course, they were meeting another friend, Lauren, who they ended up, the three of them, running together. So I went back and got my bagel. And of course, when you get to the bus area, there's no way you're finding, people that you're looking for. You might bump into people you're not expecting to see. So I walked to the bus lines by myself, eating my bagel and with my bottle of UCAN. So I just couldn't risk not having that race fuel.
Right.
Working on fueling is something I've spent a lot of time on, and I knew that I couldn't jeopardize not having that. But oh, I felt so silly for forgetting my bagel. And bagels definitely were kind of the theme of the weekend. But the energy was really excited, maybe a little bit of nerves as we all waited for the buses, and just a whole bunch of runners chatting about their shoes, chatting about their race plan, chatting about their PRs, their BQs. It was really fun. So I enjoyed talking with some people in the line, and then on the school bus sat next to a really nice woman from Oregon. And then as you got closer to Hopkinton, there actually were even people cheering for the buses. I mean,
Oh, wow.
it was quite amazing and unexpected. And then we didn't have to, I'd never run Boston before, but what I'd heard is, in the past, people would spend hours waiting at a school in Hopkinton. We got dropped off and just started walking down this really cute street of historic houses and these fences kind of keeping us in. And it was just, this trickle of runners walking as each bus dropped people off. I fortunately bumped into my friend Caitlin, and it was great. So we just did a warm up together, did some strides, calmed our nerves, did some drills. And to be honest, I think if she hadn't come, I might have just hung out in this huge village of porta potties that was behind the CVS in Hopkinton. There were, you waited like 10 seconds to get into the porta potty. I was like, this is a runner's paradise, to not have to wait in line, to kind of calm your nerves. And of course, with me, with all my GI issues, I took 4 Imodium that morning just to make sure I didn't have any issues. But I have nerves before a race and need to go to the bathroom probably like 5 times. So I would say the rolling start was probably not great for me, even though a lot of people loved it. I think I need that. You have to be at the start line at this time, because then it forces me to have a bit more structure. I could have stayed near that porta potty village for another 30 minutes, probably.
Oh, wow. All
Just
right.
with all of the nerves before the race starts.
Yeah, a lot of times, you really don't hear how nervous people are before a race. So I can only imagine that something like Boston with, the spotlight on that type of a race, the number of people there, it was probably a lot of pressure.
Yes, and good pressure. I'd say a lot of it is kind of pressure I put on myself. And I think it was, can I meet my race plan? Is it going out too fast? Can I possibly PR? And then I had all these other goals. So if I can't PR, can I break 3:10? If I can't break 3:10, can I break 3:15? And I don't think I'd gotten beyond that, but I finished beyond that. So I think it just shows you, like, you really can't have a lot of expectations. But I think I'd had a pretty good attitude going into it. I think deep down, I knew my fitness wasn't where I wanted it to be. And I knew that it's a course to be feared. No matter how many times you hear start out slow, I think it's very hard to make sure that you do that. So I think I went into it probably with realistic, a realistic sense that the main goal was to have so much fun. And while performance is great, and I did have these performance goals, the key thing was to have the experience. And my goodness, like, I had that. And I think it forever changes you as a runner to have that experience.
Yes. All right. The race is started. You've started running.
I sure did. All right. So, Eric.
Well, what we're going to say, let's kind of go into, I don't want to break down mile per mile, but let's go into, let's say, the first half of the race, the first 13 miles.
Okay. So that gets us to Wellesley. So
yes,
I walked with Caitlin. We bumped into our friend Rhonda. We all took a picture together. And then I was just like, all right, ladies, I'm going to go start. And I just went and started. And I had programmed a face on my watch the night before that I was so proud of. I did research. I was like, okay, I have distance, elapsed time, and then I have average pace and lap pace, because I had this like incredibly detailed, almost like a different time for each mile from in my race plan. So I had it all written on my arm. And of course, I only followed it for a couple months. But I started the race, and then maybe a half mile later looked at my watch and I was like, are you kidding me? And I had average pace. So I was like, okay, so I'm basically only going to know my lap pace for the first mile. Wow, brilliant. So I think at that point I was like, wow, I really have no idea how this race is going to go, but I guess I'm going to go by effort. And I tell you, I thought I was slow. I thought I was following my race plan. I thought I was going slow on those first miles. I started the race a bit late, right? Because I forgot my bagel and I didn't want to leave Porta Potty Town. So I was there were more runners that were slower than me when I started. So I was kind of weaving and all that. And I was convinced I was going at like 7:30 pace. And I think my race plan had me going at like 7:05 for those first miles. I tell you, I probably was like 7 minutes, 6:43. Like, I had no business going that fast. Fortunately, I had to stop and use a porta potty. This is why I didn't want to leave that village of porta potties. I had to stop and pee in mile 2. So that slowed me down. It was a 7-11 minute mile. But the energy, everybody was clearly going fast. And I just thought they were going fast. So those first few miles, I get it. I understand why people caution you to not go too fast. And I think with my user error with my watch, I had less control over it. And there were fewer fans cheering, but you already got the sense of the energy and the energy of the runners and the energy of the crowds that were there. So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go by effort and let's just see how this goes. What can I do about this? So just tried to kind of find runners to maybe kind of peg off of. And just started to enjoy the town. So each town that you run through, you kind of come upon almost like a town center or like more densely packed houses. And I'm an urban planner. So for me, this was fascinating, right? Going from the small town in the exurbs to the suburbs to the kind of transit part of Boston and then to like near downtown Boston. So I just loved it. And the energy in each town was different, but it was electric. And until the halfway, I think Natick was my favorite. There were some houses with like house parties on the lawn with amazing hip hop music. I just loved it. I was like, you people are all amazing. And then there would be quieter stretches and then you'd come into another town. So I just loved that anticipation of a next group of like fan support, and the fan support was amazing. I was feeling great at this point. I think my friends who were tracking me, they were like, you were on pace for a 3:04 marathon, which would have been a 3-minute PR. And of course I had gone out way too fast. I got to Wellesley in my second fastest half marathon time ever, a 1:32. And of course had done all of the rookie mistakes, but I thought the Wellesley Scream Tunnel was epic. It was so much fun. I high-fived as many of those women as I could. They were absolutely having a ball. So that for me was such a highlight of the race. I went to a women's college in Massachusetts, Smith, in the western part of the state. So I think I yelled at a couple of them when I first entered the high five tunnel, like, I went to Smith. And of course, our schools are big rivals. They probably thought I was crazy, but I was just having so much fun and enjoying the race as much as I could, even though I had made some rookie mistakes.
Okay, so that's the first half of the race. Now let's talk about the last half of the race. You've done the half marathon. Well, you've done half of the marathon. Now you have the second half. How are you feeling going towards finishing the race?
Yeah, so I would say as I went through kind of the little town centers, Wellesley Hills, still kind of soaking in all the energy, still feeling really good. I think it was maybe though mile 14, 15, where I was like, oh, maybe my breathing is a teeny bit labored. I think I need to slow down a little bit. And I think at that point, because it's such an undulating course, I probably was like kind of 7:10s at that point. But I was like, okay, I need to back off things. And 7:20 was kind of feeling good. I was like, I think I can sustain this till the end. Like peak fitness was back in July, but I'm still pretty fit. And then at mile 17, I think I was more like a 7:40. And I was like, ooh, okay. What's happening? Why am I slowing down? And the back of my legs were on fire. And it was really interesting. Most people that I spoke to, because a lot of people seemed to slow down from mile 17 onwards. But for them, it was their quads. So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if I was braking in those first few miles, even though I thought I was going pretty slow and I actually was going pretty fast. I don't know. I, it was my hamstrings.
Interesting.
So I thought that was really interesting, but they were just they felt like lead. Like it started to feel like I was running through sand. So even though my cardiovascular system was like, hey, I'm pretty sure I can run 7:20s, my legs were like, nope, no, you're not. My fueling was on point. Everything was going great. Like it was kind of sneaky humid was how we described the day. Like we knew it was nothing like what people had experienced in Chicago. So I think we all felt pretty thankful for the weather, but it was my legs, Eric. And I don't know if this is a strength training thing. Like, I definitely was trying to do strength once or twice a week, but I don't lift heavy. I'm kind of a newbie with incorporating strength training into my running. So I really need to figure out what it is about my hamstrings. But I had never experienced that in a marathon before. Like, I've certainly experienced fatigue,
Right.
but it wasn't, I'd never experienced a part of my body shutting down.
That is interesting. For that to be your first time ever experiencing that, and because you've ran marathons before, and you
Yes,
never
this was
had that happen.
my sixth marathon, and I'd never had pain during a marathon before. I mean, I've had like full body pain, like in my first marathon, like I want to lay down and die.
Right.
But that's just the pain of a marathon. This was the back of my leg saying, I cannot run fast. And it's really interesting. Like, I don't know if it was for the quads, but you would maybe occasionally see someone like walking backwards or it's just
Yes.
really interesting, like how people tackled this. And then a runner that I follow in Charlottesville, this guy, Will, he had gone out in a marathon a couple weeks later and had kind of a similar body experience to me. And it was a flatter course, but he said he just stopped on the side and stretched. And then his legs felt great. And I was like, it never crossed my mind to stop and stretch. I think we're so programmed to not stop.
Right. Yes.
Maybe we might walk. Like I started walking through the water stations after mile 17 because my handheld was empty and I wanted to make sure I was getting enough fueling as it became more humid and the sun was out. But I never thought to stop and stretch my hamstrings, which probably would have helped. So that's a great lesson, I think. Like if a part of your body is aching so badly that it's slowing you down by, for me, it started slowing me down a minute or more, right?
Right.
Why not just take a few seconds and stretch? Like if I can stop and go to the porta potty and lose 20 seconds, why can't I stop and stretch? And maybe that would help alleviate whatever the pain was. But I started running kind of high sevens, then it was in the eights, and it kind of stayed in the eights until the last mile where I think I was able to pick it up a lot. I mean, I shifted my mission and my goals. It was like, okay, I'm just now going to have so much fun, and I'm just going to finish this race and do the best I can given this additional setback, right? My body saying, no way can we keep this pace up. So the crowds were amazing, and I just tried to soak it all in and just have fun and appreciate getting to run Boston, appreciate being at a big city race again. And um, it was amazing. I'd say the one technical thing I tried to work on, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to work on running the tangents as well as I could. So I was really proud of that. I think my total distance on my watch was 26.3 something. So I just also tried to focus on that. Like, how can I run the tangents? And maybe that's something I can learn and work on. And maybe also it could distract me from the pain that my body was going through. And I would say the hills were certainly formidable, the Newton Hills. The first one, though, I'm not even really sure I noticed it started. I live in a very hilly place, and I'm sure you'll hear that from Monica too. So I think actually the size and length of the hills for our training was not that dramatic. I think it was the placement of the hills towards the latter part of the race. And of course, for me, they were starting at around mile 16, 17, which is when I slowed down. And it's when the pain in my legs really started to be evident. So I don't know. I can't tell you that it hurt more running up or down. It hurt in both. Basically, just my legs were holding me back.
Well, I think what it is, and all runners probably experience is that, it's you don't stop. If you stop, you're not going to be able to start back, at the same, for lack of a better term, level that you were running at. So you just keep running through the pain. You keep running through the pain, don't stop. And I think that's just something that we have to learn to stop. That is, it's one of those, it's not all that. It's okay to stop for a moment. The goal is to finish the race. And that's what you want to do, is to finish the race. So, it's okay to stop.
Yes. Next time, if I ever have hamstring pain like that again, I am definitely going to stop and stretch. And I also, like, a little part of me is like, am I not mentally tough enough? Like, is there a way I could have blocked this out? And of course, I thought I was running way slower than I was, right?
Right.
So obviously I slowed down. And of course, my friends who were tracking me, they were like, whoa, you really slowed down. But it was amazing. And so, you keep going through all the towns, and, you pass through Boston College, and oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how many students were out kind of partying. And then you start seeing the T, and you're getting close. You see the Sitco sign, and it's so far away. I just tried to soak it all in, and finish as best I could. So I really loved, like, finally passing the Sitco sign. I was around a lot of other runners who were struggling too, though, to be honest. And I think for a lot of runners, they probably finished with appreciation and elation, and just maybe like a little bit of disappointment, or like the strong desire to kind of have a do-over, right? Because it did seem like the core.
Hey, Sophie, you still there?
After the race
Hey,
was
Sophie, I lost you for a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost you.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So basically, I was just talking about how amazing it was to pass the Sitco sign, make those turns on Hereford and left on Boylston, and finish the race, and just kind of take it all in. I mean, it's so electric, and the city just clearly loves this marathon. And you feel very loved and appreciated running it. So I bumped into a couple friends when I finished, and just tried to soak in the medal and the the energy at the end of the race. I was dying for some Gatorade. And then the afternoon after the race, getting to celebrate with friends was one of the best afternoons I've ever had. It was just so much fun. So, everybody kind of sharing their race experience, and I think just such positive, thankful energy. And then also this energy of like, man, I want to try this course again.
All right, so you finished the race. What do you know now that you wish you knew before you started? That if you could go back in time and, as you say, kind of get a redo and tell yourself, what would it be?
Yes, I mean, I think before any huge marathon, you see elite runners dropping out, right? And sometimes it's an injury, and other times it's because they had setbacks during their training. And I would never have not run it. But I now see why they do that, right? They don't want to waste their body on that marathon. So I think the takeaway for me there as just an amateur runner is the training and the build. It really matters. You can have a couple bad workouts, maybe get sick for a couple days, but if you miss 7 workouts, your fitness is just not going to be the same. And so I think maybe having just a much more realistic attitude about that and going into the race with more realistic expectations. I'm still thrilled with my time, right? Like
Right.
just under 3:17. That's my second fastest marathon. But sure, my goals were to run faster than that. But I think just appreciating that every marathon is part of your journey and that you learn from each one. So stopping and stretching, not forgetting your bagel, and just having realistic expectations instead of like doubts in your head and like these half-ass attempts at like trying to verbalize your lack of peak fitness. Instead, actually like speaking up and maybe saying with your coach, like, no, we need a more realistic plan. This is actually not a realistic race plan. So I think those were all kind of takeaways for me. Like your intuition is probably right? Like
Right.
I knew I wasn't in shape to PR. Why did I still go for it? Why didn't I run with my friends who had a more realistic time? And who knows, running with them, those first few miles, like 10 to 15 seconds slower, I still could have had the same hamstring experience.
Right.
So I think you just never know. Like the marathon is such a beast that, that saying it owes you nothing. I mean, that is so true. And then I think on top of that, the Boston course is just so challenging. So is there specific strength training or running downhill training that you can do to help prepare you for that specific course? And I think maybe I was ready to have a pretty good time at a flat course, but not on the Boston course. It's humbling.
Yeah. I bet. So what's next for you? Any big race planned next?
So yes, I actually am switching to a new coach, and I'm really excited about that. Unfortunately, my previous coach needed to scale back the number of athletes she was working with. So I'm I'm excited to be starting with a new coach, and I'm going to focus on hopefully improving my 10K and half marathon time in the spring, and then I had deferred Berlin to the fall of 2022. So hopefully get back out after the marathon on a flat course in the fall. I'm excited. I feel pretty good. I took 2 full weeks off after Boston, and I really needed that. Right after Boston, I traveled to my first work trip since February of 2020. And it was my organization's annual conference that we were finally doing one in person in Chicago. So going from the marathon immediately to a work conference, I was so tired just from walking around on these tired legs, from being on and interacting with people and working long hours. And you know what, Eric? This is so funny. we have two conferences a year. We're a nonprofit based in DC. We have a fall conference and a spring conference. And our spring conference starts in San Diego the day after Boston 2022, the April Boston that, I did qualify for.
Right.
Running this Boston. So I think I had a couple weeks of like, I want to do over. I want to run Boston as soon as possible again and tackle the course differently. I think I'm going to have to wait on that one because I just don't think I can do the marathon conference back to back again so soon. So maybe that's just the universe's way of telling me it's okay to just run one marathon a year.
Yes. Well, Sophie, thank you for coming back onto the show and sharing your experience. This was awesome.
You're welcome, Eric. It was really fun to chat with you again.
Yes. And everyone, if you want to find out more about Sophie, go back and listen to episode 9 and you will get her whole story. All right. Again, Sophie, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the No Gimmicks, Just Sweat podcast. We really appreciate everyone who tunes in each week. If you enjoyed today's show, please support us by subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember to tell your friends about the No Gimmicks, Just Sweat podcast, so we can continue to have awesome conversations with everyday athletes just like you. Until next time, have an amazing week.